Hello, John Adams here, congressional candidate for the 15th Congressional District of Ohio. Today I'm here in London, Ohio, in Madison County. I'll turn this around so you can see a little bit. There's the courthouse right there, beautiful courthouse here in London. So, what I want to talk about today, before I do this, before I turn to my campaign issue, I want to tell you a little bit about Madison County. It has a population of about 45,000 people, and it's basically an agricultural, farming, and ranching county. That's the primary businesses that are here. The people who live in Madison County face the same challenges that other farmers and ranchers face in the other rural counties of the district. Now, I addressed those issues in another video that I published from Vinton County. Now, turning to this very important issue in my campaign, which is the subject of voter integrity. A few months ago, I was circulating my petition for Congress, and I asked many of the Republicans who I met if they thought that the presidential election was stolen last year in the favor of Joe Biden. The response was almost unanimous, that President Trump had his presidency stolen from him at the polls last November. Now, some Republicans, many of them actually, were livid about the voter fraud. Now, I've done a great deal of research on this issue. If you listen to Democrats and their propagandists in the mainstream media, they will tell you that the election was pristine. Nothing to see here, just move on. Now, on the other hand, I've read many reports of voter fraud, reports coming out of Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, to name a few. If just one state, using, for example, Arizona, if their vote is fraudulent, then their 11 electoral votes could be the difference in which a candidate wins the presidency. So, one state can essentially steal the voting integrity of every other voter in America. They can determine the outcome of the election. If our nation cannot guarantee that our elections are legitimate, then it is game over for America. We would become a banana republic, a banana republic sliding into a totalitarian nation ruled by the Democrat Party. As I understand, many thousands of Americans have filed affidavits that voter fraud occurred in many states in November's election. If voter fraud was committed, then the criminals need to go to jail. Was the fraud enough to have stolen the election from President Trump? I don't know. If so, what then would be the remedy? Would it be addressed by the United States Supreme Court? I don't know. We Americans need an answer. If the Democrat Party can steal any election, then they would never be held accountable for their actions while in office. They could continue to steal elections forever and do whatever they want. Or, as the Soviet Union communist dictator Joseph Stalin said, those who vote decide nothing. Those who count the vote decide everything. Now, here's some of the charges that have been made in these various states. Persons voting in someone else's name. Persons registering in multiple locations to vote multiple times in the same election. Persons voting even though they're not eligible because they're felons or non-citizens. Persons paying or intimidating people to vote for certain candidates. There are many reports that the voting machines were tampered with that would change a vote from Donald Trump to Joseph Biden. There were other reports that ballots were run through a ballot counting machine multiple times in order to get more votes for Joe Biden. There were reports that hundreds of thousands of ballots were dropped off in the middle of the night, the day after the election, with Joe Biden being the only candidate marked on the ballot. No marks were made for any other candidates in the down ballot. Now, more reports were that thousands of Pennsylvania ballots were being driven from New York to Pennsylvania the day after the election, with Joe Biden being the only candidate marked on those ballots. No marks were made for any other candidates in the down ballot, just him. People counting the ballots in various states in question did not allow third parties to witness the counting of the ballots, which is a violation of voter law. There were many reports in different states that absentee ballots were mailed out to voters without the voters requesting the ballots. There have been many cases of local elections being overturned because of fraud. That has occurred in New Jersey, Indiana, and many other states. In this past election, we're not talking about local elections. We're talking about the unprecedented action, the stealing of the presidency by the Democrat Party. So, what is the remedy for the voter fraud? Now, I want to make this perfectly clear. This voter fraud issue is not so much about President Donald Trump. This is about guaranteeing voting integrity in all of our future American elections. Individual states control our American electoral process and voting. It's a state's issue. State legislatures must pass laws requiring voter identification. That would ensure that people aren't stealing others' identities and their right to vote. Plus, a voter must be 18 years old to vote. We cannot have 15-year-olds showing up at the polls wanting to vote without proof of age. States should work together to ensure voter registration to identify voters who are registered in multiple places. One cross-check program has already identified hundreds of thousands of potential duplicate registrations across 30 states, as well as evidence of illegal double voting. States should also compare the voter rolls with government records to identify convicted felons and non-citizens who should be removed from the rolls. Also, dead people should not be allowed to vote. The dead who voted in Chicago in 1960 helped get John Kennedy elected president. One of the most important roles of government is to safeguard the electoral process and ensure that every voter's right to cast a ballot is protected. That not only protects our right to vote, that's how we protect the future of our Constitution, our republic, and our freedom and our liberty. I spoke about voter fraud in my first video in this campaign. It is absolutely critical that we must assure voter integrity. I stated it then and I repeat it now. If I am elected to Congress, as soon as possible I would work with the Republican Freedom Caucus in Congress and urge that they send a congressional delegation to the various states in which voter fraud was reported. Our congressional delegation would meet with the state legislators and provide them documented information about voter fraud that was committed in their state. Then we would offer the remedies that I have just outlined. It is the state legislator's responsibility to ensure voter integrity. No state must be allowed to cheat at the polls. Friends, we Americans are so close to losing our freedom and our liberty. It is not totally lost yet, but we are so close to becoming a totalitarian dictatorship. I've been saying this throughout my campaign, and I truly believe this, that our campaign is the beginning of the fight to the death for the soul of our nation. On August the 3rd, I would be honored with your vote. Thank you, and may God bless America.